There is another group that is frustrated by this documentary, and they are both conservative, and many of them are Christian. And their problem with the documentary is that for Matt to get in these spaces and places and have these conversations, it required deception. I recently saw Matt Walsh's new documentary, Am I Racist?, in theaters. And I thought that I would give you my perspective as a Christian pastor on whether this movie is edifying, whether it reaches its goals, whether it is helpful or harmful to the political discourse, and just kind of my general thoughts. Now, if you know nothing about this movie, Matt Walsh, who is a podcaster from the Daily Wire, he put out a movie a year or two ago, another documentary called What is a Woman? It was a hugely successful documentary. It was specifically targeted at what's going on with the transgender conversation. And this is now tackling DEI. And this documentary actually released in theaters. If you haven't seen anything from it, here's one of the clips from the movie.
My daughter's 4 years old. I am an anti-racist educator, quote unquote. She's still watching Disney movies, and she is choosing a white princess over princesses of color.
Have you talked to her about that?
All the time.
My 3-year-old daughter is her favorite princess is Moana.
Love it.
It's a good sign.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, there's a little bit of cultural appropriation here. She wants to be Moana for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we navigate that? Do I go and buy the Pacific Islander native attire for my white 3-year-old?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
But I guess what we might call the Moana problem here is what, on one hand, is cultural appropriation. On the other hand, there's gravitating towards white characters.
Right.
So it's almost like no matter which way you go, you end up back in racism.
We think every space belongs to us because we live in a white supremacist society.
Is America an inherently racist country?
I think the word inherent is challenging there. If we say...
Fundamentally,
yes. America is racist to its bones. All of the...
So inherently.
Yeah.
They gonna say you... So that's a clip from the movie. And I mean, this perspective on Disney princesses. This is towards the beginning of the movie. And what happens moving forward is he actually goes in disguise because he's quite recognizable these days. And he plays along. So when someone teaches him something about diversity, equity, or inclusion, how to be an anti-racist, how to really kind of segment and segregate everyone by their defining interracial qualities and then judge them and assess them accordingly, he just goes with it and he goes further and further down the rabbit hole. And he is getting into these interviews with some of the biggest anti-racist thinkers in the world. He even sits down with Robin DiAngelo, who famously wrote the book White Fragility. Now, people in the DEI community are obviously outraged by this. That is to be expected. The people that he interviewed who were there kind of under false pretense, they're outraged. Some of them have just like wiped their Twitters and closed down all their social media accounts because they're humiliated by this. What I don't think most people anticipated is there is another group that is frustrated by this documentary, and they are both conservative, and many of them are Christian. And their problem with the documentary is that for Matt to get in these spaces and places and have these conversations, it required deception. And so they're saying, if you have to use deception in order to get your story out, if you have to kind of fudge the truth, if you have to go in disguise, if you have to show up somewhat under false pretense, you're almost a spy, like going into these spaces that you don't actually belong in order to extract information, then that is wrong and it's unethical, and therefore we shouldn't have done it. So are they right about that? Is it okay that Matt Walsh went undercover? Is it okay that he showed up with disguised pretense in order to have these conversations? I'm very curious what you think about that. Part of this has to be assessed culturally, because the idea of kind of a documentary, mockumentary, going undercover and getting people in positions in order to extract both real information and comedy out of that given situation, that is not new. That's what Sacha Baron Cohen does. Sacha Baron, don't know how to say his name. Sacha Baron, what's his name? Kid's so bad with names. no one will do this because only 18 people watch this podcast. But if you went through these 70 episodes and just clipped out every time I got someone's name wrong, that alone would be a 45-minute episode.
Wow.
Okay. So, Sasha Barney, comedian, losing my mind. He does this, right? That's Borat and Bruno and Ali G and all these things. And he goes in just to normal everyday people and kind of, if, you know, I don't like any of these terms, but he like punches down, you know, he just goes to regular everyday Americans and then gets comedic moments out of it and typically makes them look like idiots, right? And so Matt is, if we're punching anywhere, he's punching up. He's meeting with PhDs, he's meeting with professors, influencers, and he's also trying to make them look foolish by forcing them into the reality of their ideological positions. A little bit of a spoiler if you want to skip this part, but it's been widely reported on. Robin DiAngelo, who like almost all anti-racist thinkers and philosophers, she pushes for reparations. And so one of the things they do is they put her in a situation where they kind of force her to do what she says and to give reparations to a black member of Matt Walsh's production crew. It's incredibly awkward, and you can watch her sitting in the paradox of what she has pushed forward and become famous preaching and having to do it in real time. And it's pretty kind of an unbelievable moment. So is it okay that they use deceptive practices to get these interviews? Culturally, this is something that we have accepted, that we have everyone left, right, and center has taken in, laughed at, enjoyed. Mockumentary, it is a genre of film that doesn't necessarily make it moral or make it right. Part of the question is, what is the end goal of this and what is it exposing? And does it have any kind of a righteous cause? And that's going to be up for Matt to articulate, for Matt Walsh and his team. That's going to be up to you to decide. What I want to give is a little bit of context. And I tried to think throughout scripture, is there anywhere where we see something that could be put in this same light as calling it deceptive or false pretense, unethical or immoral? There are quite a few times that in the Old Testament, Israel or key leaders were able to push forward God's plan and actually secure victory through means that, you know, if we took a bunch of people from 2024 who are like these constant heresy hunters, they might have issue with it as well. Joshua sent spies into Jericho. They went in under false pretense. They disguised themselves. They were, quote unquote, lying about who they are by omission. Then, when they were in danger of getting caught, they hid and stayed in the house of a prostitute.
Wow.
I can just imagine someone from 2024 who's got a problem with Matt's movie, putting them in a time machine back into Israel, trying to take over the promised land. And it's like, if we're going to go in there under false pretense, I just don't think that that's very ethical. Can you imagine when they come back and they tell the story about hiding in the house of a prostitute? It's like, you did what? And there's no way that God is going to bless. No way the walls are coming down now, right? David at one point finds himself, King David, right? Very stoic, man after God's own heart. He finds himself in enemy territory and he pretends to be insane. He starts just like babbling and drooling all over himself so that people think he's literally lost his mind. Queen Esther, who God placed in her position for such a time as this, she hid her ethnic identity from her husband and the king in order for God's plan to play out over time. I am not saying inherently that what Matt did was automatically right, because there are times where there were disguises and different pretenses used in order to secure victory in the Old Testament. What I'm saying is it's not unprecedented. What I'm saying is that it is a culturally relevant art form, and that when there are things that need to be exposed, as long as we have this law of liberty, right? There is no thou shalt not make a mockumentary in scripture. And so we have to live out our conscience and we have to check our heart. And what's interesting when you watch the film, and then when you listen to some of the producers and even Matt talk about it in the background, one of the things that happened is towards the end of the movie, there was a scene and it just kind of ended up going too far. And the crew seemingly came under some kind of conviction of like, okay, this now we've got to pull the plug on. Like we have moved from using these tactful ways of exposing the truth of what's going on and what is filling our kids' heads with absolute nonsense, terrible ideology. And we've kind of moved into the realm of what doesn't feel comfortable anymore. These movies are always going to be controversial by nature. They're made to be controversy. They sell because of the controversy. The hope is, now that it's out, that it starts the right kind of conversations, that it exposes the right kind of truth. We should not be deceptive in our everyday life. We should be forthright. We should be forthcoming. And I think we should be kind of slow to just start throwing stones automatically at people who are trying to push the ball forward on the right kind of initiatives. And if we think they're done in the wrong way, certainly say something about it, but let's think through it and think through it critically. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/ClaytonTime.